Close your eyes. Let the noise of the day fall away. Tonight, you don't need to solve anything. You don't need to be anyone. You can just be here in this quiet space and rest. 2,000 years ago, on a hillside overlooking the Sea of Galilee, a man sat down in the warm afternoon sun. The grass beneath him was soft. The breeze carried the scent of wild flowers and distant water. And thousands gathered around him, their faces turned toward his waiting. They had heard he spoke differently, not like the religious leaders who quoted rules and pointed fingers, but like someone who actually knew God, like someone who loved them. And when he opened his mouth, he gave the world the greatest sermon ever preached. Every word he spoke that day was for you. Tonight, let those words become your lullaby. Let them settle into your heart like seeds into warm soil. Let them carry you into the deepest, most peaceful sleep. You're safe here, and as you listen, know this. The same voice that spoke on that hillside still speaks tonight over you, into you, calling you home. Chapter 1. The Mountain and the Chapter 1. The Mountain and the Multitude. Multitude. It was late morning when Jesus left Capernaum. The town had grown too loud, too demanding. Everywhere he turned had grown too demanding. Everywhere he turned, hands reached for him. Voices called his name. People pressed in, wanting healing, wanting answers, wanting something only he could give. So he walked. His sandals kicked up dust on the narrow path leading out of town. Behind him, his disciples followed. Peter wiping sweat from his forehead, James and John talking quietly, Andrew squinting against the bright sun. The air smelled different as they climbed higher, cleaner, the scent of wild thyme growing between the rocks, sun-warmed grass, and beneath it all, the faint trace of the sea carried up on the morning breeze. Above them the sky, stretched wide and impossibly blue. Not a single cloud, just endless light pouring down over the hills of Galilee like honey. Jesus kept walking until he found a level place, a natural amphitheater carved into the hillside. Below, the Sea of Galilee shimmered like polished silver. Fishing boats drifted near the shore, their sails hanging loose in the calm. He sat down. In that culture, when a rabbi sat, it meant something. It meant he was about to teach. It meant his words carried authority. It meant listen carefully. The disciples gathered close, forming a circle around him. And then from the path below they came. At first, just a few. A fisherman who had worked all night and caught nothing. His hands were raw from the nets, his eyes hollow from exhaustion. But when he heard Jesus was teaching, he came. Then a mother carrying her youngest child on her hip. She had 3 more at home. Her husband had died 2 winters ago. She didn't know how much longer she could keep them fed, but something drew her up that hill. An old man with a walking stick, a young woman whose wedding was in 2 weeks, a tax collector who everyone hated, a beggar who owned nothing but the robe on his back. They came from the villages, scattered along the shore, from the fishing boats, from the fields where they worked from dawn until their bodies ached. They came because the world had grown hard, and this man spoke as if God himself was listening. By the time the Asun reached its highest point, hundreds sat on the grass. Then 1,000, then more. Mothers hushed their babies. Old men leaned forward, straining to hear. Children sat cross-legged at the front, eyes wide with curiosity. The Sea of Galilee sparkled below them. Wildflowers dotted the hillside in bursts of red and yellow. The air was warm but not hot. A perfect day, a holy day. And Jesus looked out over them. He saw the fisherman's calloused hands, the widow's tired eyes, the young man's clenched jaw, holding back anger, the woman who carried shame like a stone tied around her neck. He saw them all, not as a crowd, but as people, beloved, known, seen, and he loved them. Then he opened his mouth, and the world changed. There was something different about the way Jesus taught. The Pharisees spoke in the synagogues every Sabbath. Their voices were sharp, cutting. They quoted the law of Moses with precision, dissecting every word, arguing over interpretations. They made faith feel like a burden, a weight too heavy to carry. But Jesus didn't sound like them. His voice was steady, calm. There was no anger in it, no condemnation, just a quiet authority that seemed to reach past the ears, straight into the dials, straight into the soul. He didn't shout, he didn't perform. He simply spoke, and when he spoke, it felt like the words had been waiting since the beginning of time to finally be said. What the crowd didn't understand yet was that this sermon wasn't a list of rules. It wasn't a moral code or a religious checklist. It was an invitation into a kingdom that operated by completely different laws than the kingdoms of Rome or Jerusalem. A kingdom where the poor were rich, where the mourning found comfort, where the meek inherited everything. This was the kingdom of heaven, and it was closer than they thought. Rest here, let your breathing slow. Jesus looked out over the faces before him. Some hopeful, some desperate, some simply curious, and he spoke the first word of heaven, blessed. Chapter 2, the Beatitudes, blessed are. Chapter 2, the Beatitudes, blessed are. The word hung in the air like the first note of a song. Blessed. In their language it was a story. It meant more than happy. It meant whole, complete, exactly where you're supposed to be. It meant you are held, and what Jesus said next turned their entire world upside down. There was a man, and sitting near the back of the crowd, his name was Simon, not Simon Peter the disciple, just Simon, a potter from a village near Bethsaida. For 30 years he had worked clay. His hands were stained with it, red dust under his fingernails that never quite washed out. He made bowls and jars and oil lamps. Simple things, useful things. But Simon had never felt like he was enough. He wasn't educated, like the scribes, couldn't read Hebrew, like the Pharisees, didn't have money, like the merchants in Capernaum. He was just a potter. And in a world that measured worth by status and wealth, that meant he was small when Jesus said the first beatitude. Simon almost missed it. The words were so quiet. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Poor in spirit, Simon had heard, poor in money, poor in prospects, poor in everything that mattered. But Jesus didn't say, blessed are the rich, blessed are the powerful, blessed are the ones who have it all together. He said, blessed are the poor in spirit, the ones who know they have nothing to offer God but empty hands. And something shifted in Simon's chest. A tightness he hadn't known was there, began to loosen because for the first time someone was saying, your emptiness is not a flaw. It's the doorway. You don't have to do anything tonight. Not far from Simon sat a woman named Miriam. She had buried her husband 3 months ago. Fever took him in 4 days. One morning he was laughing. By Sabbath he was gone. She hadn't stopped crying since. Her neighbors told her to be strong, to trust God's plan, to stop mourning and get back to work. But how could she? The bed still smelled like him. His sandals still sat by the door. When Jesus spoke the second beatitude, Miriam's breath caught. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed, not cursed, not weak, not forgotten. Bless. No one had ever said that to her. No one had ever called her grief holy, but Jesus did. He looked out over the crowd, and it was as if he saw her, saw the tears she cried in the dark, saw the morning she woke and forgot just for a moment that he was gone, saw the weight she carried alone. And he called her blessed because grief means you loved, and love is the language of heaven. Miriam closed her eyes. A tear slipped down her cheek, but this time it didn't feel like drowning. It felt like being held. Your tears are seen. Everyone, halfway up the hill, a young man named David sat with his arms crossed. He was 17, strong, healthy, and furious. His father had been cheated out of land by a Roman officer. His sister had been mocked in the marketplace for being unmarried at 20. His brother had joined the zealots, talking of revolution, of taking back what Rome had stolen. David wanted to fight, wanted to rage, wanted to take a sword and make them pay. But when Jesus spoke the third beatitude, something in David's clenched fists began to relax. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Meek. David had always thought meekness was weakness, the beaten down ones who wouldn't stand up for themselves. But the way Jesus said it, meekness sounded like something else, like strength that didn't need to prove itself, like a lion choosing not to roar. David had spent years thinking rage would set him free, but all it had done was make him a prisoner of his own bitterness. What if there was another way? What if the ones who chose gentleness over violence, mercy over revenge, What if they were the ones who would inherit everything, not through force, but through love? The thought terrified him, and strangely, it gave him hope. Let go of what you've been holding. Near the front, a young woman named Leah sat with her hands folded in her lap. She had grown up in a Top's home. Her father was a Pharisee. She knew the law better than most men, could recite entire passages from memory. But knowing the law and living it were two different things. Leah had tried. She fasted twice a week, tithed down to the smallest herb in her garden, prayed the required prayers at the required times, but she never felt close to God. She felt exhausted. When Jesus spoke the fourth beatitude, something in her broke open. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be satisfied. Hunger, thirst. Leah knew what those felt like. Real physical hunger. The kind that wakes you at night. The kind that makes you ache. And Jesus said that's how she should long for righteousness. Not as a list to check off. Not as a list to check off. Not as a performance to perfect. But as a desperate need, a craving that couldn't be ignored. And the promise was, you will be satisfied not with scraps, not with rules, but with a feast. Leah's eyes filled with tears, because for the first time, her hunger didn't feel like failure. It felt like the beginning. You don't have to be perfect, just hungry. An older man named Tobias sat toward the edge of the crowd. He had done something he couldn't take back. Years ago, in anger, he had spoken words to his brother. Cruel words, words that severed something that had once been whole. They hadn't spoken since. Tobias had tried to forget, to move on, but the guilt followed him everywhere. In the silence of his home, in the faces of his children, who asked why Uncle Reuben never visited anymore. When Jesus spoke the fifth beatitude, Tobias felt the words land in his chest like stones. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Mercy. Tobias knew he didn't deserve it. He had said what he said, done what he'd done. There was no erasing it, but Jesus was saying something impossible. If you show mercy, you will receive it. Not because you earned it, but because mercy is a river, and rivers only flow one direction downward. God's mercy flows to you and through you. It must flow to others. If you dam it up, it dies, but if you let it flow, it becomes a flood that heals everyone it touches. Tobias sat very still. In his mind, he saw his brother's face, and for the first time in years, he thought, maybe it's not too late. Let mercy flow through you. A young mother named Deborah sat near the back, her baby asleep against her chest. She had made mistakes, choices, she wished she could undo. And though she'd asked God for forgiveness 100 times, the shame still clung to her like oil. She avoided certain streets in town, kept her eyes down at the well, wondered if people whispered when she passed. When Jesus spoke the sixth beatitude, Deborah looked up. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Pure in heart. Deborah almost laughed. She wasn't pure. Her heart was a mess of regret and fear and longing. But then she realized Jesus wasn't talking about perfection. He was talking about singularity. A pure heart isn't a perfect heart. It's an undivided heart, a heart that wants one thing above all else, God himself. Not God's blessings, not God's approval, just God. And the promise was staggering. You will see him, not someday far away, but now, in the kindness of a stranger, in the laughter of your child, in the quiet whisper that says, I love you still. Deborah held her baby closer, and for the first time in months, she felt clean. You were known. You are loved. An older woman named Judith had spent her life trying to make peace between her quarreling sons, between neighbors who'd stopped speaking, between families torn apart by old grudges. It was exhausting work, and often thankless. But when Jesus spoke the seventh beatitude, Judith felt something warm settle in her chest. Blessed are blessed, ye peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Children of God, not servants, not subjects. Children, because peacemaking is what God does. It's who he is. He stepped into the war between heaven and earth, between holiness and sin, and said, I will make peace, even if it kills me. And it did, but in that death peace was born. And now everyone who follows him is called to do the same, to carry peace into chaos, to build bridges where others build walls, not because it's easy, but because That's what children of the God of peace do." Judith smiled. She was tired, but she wasn't alone. "You are a child of God." At the very edge of the crowd sat a man named Ezra. He had been imprisoned once, beaten, left for dead, not for anything he'd done wrong, but because he believed in a God the Romans didn't recognize. When Jesus spoke the 8th Beatitude, Ezra's scarred hands trembled. "Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed, not cursed, not abandoned, blessed, because persecution is not a sign that God has forgotten you. It's a sign you're on the right path. The world hated the prophets, the world hated Jesus, and if you follow him, the world will hate you too. But don't be afraid, because the kingdom of heaven is yours, not someday." Now, Ezra closed his eyes. The scars still arced in the cold. But he knew they were not marks of defeat. They were marks of belonging. You are not alone in your suffering. After the 8th Beatitude, Jesus added one more thing: rejoice and be glad when people insult you and persecute you because of me. Rejoice because great is your reward in heaven. Rejoice not because pain doesn't hurt, but because pain is not the end. The crowd sat in silence. The sun was warm on their faces, the grass soft beneath them, and the words Jesus had spoken settled into their hearts like rain in't. Oh, dry ground, they had come as the forgotten, the broken, the ones the world passed by. And Jesus had called them blessed. Every single one sleep now. You are blessed too. Chapter 3, Salt and Light. Chapter 3, Salt and Light. After naming the blessed ones, Jesus didn't tell them what to do. Not yet. First, he told them who they were, because identity comes before action. You can't live rightly until you know who you are. And so Jesus said two things, two simple, stunning truths. You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. Not you should try to be, not maybe one day, but you are present tense already. True, there was a woman in the crowd named Abigail. She was a merchant's wife. Not wealthy but comfortable. She had a nice home servants, a good reputation in town. But lately she'd been wondering what's the point. She did everything right, kept a clean house, raised her children well, attended synagogue, but it all felt empty when Jesus said, "You are the salt of the earth." Abigail didn't understand at first. Salt was precious. Every household kept it in small clay jars, rationed carefully, a pinch in the stew, a sprinkle on the bread. Without it, food tasted like dust. But salt did more than flavor. It preserved. In the heat of Galilee, meat spoiled in hours. But rubbed with salt, it lasted for days. Salt healed, too. Abigail had seen her mother pack salt into wounds to draw out infection. It burned at first, but it saved lives. Salt was small, ordinary, easy to provoke, but without it, everything fell apart. Then Jesus added a warning. But if salt loses its saltiness, it's no longer good for anything except to be thrown out. And suddenly, Abigail understood. She had been living her whole life, trying not to lose anything, not to risk, not to stand out, not to get involved. But salt only works when it touches what it's meant to preserve. If you keep it in the jar, it's useless. And Abigail realized she'd been living in the jar, safe, protected, separate, but not useful. That night, she would go home and do something she'd never done before. She would bring bread to the widow 3 doors down, the one everyone whispered about, the one no one visited, not because it would make her look good, but because she was salt, and salt doesn't stay hidden. Let your life touch the world around you. Near Abigail sat a baker named Thomas. His shop stood in the center of the marketplace. Every morning before dawn, he lit the ovens, kneaded dough until his shoulders ached, baked bread that filled the street with the smell of yeast and warmth. People came to his shop, but they didn't come for him. They came for the bread. He was invisible. Just hands that worked, a face they didn't remember. When Jesus said, "You are the salt of the earth," Thomas looked down at his own hands, scarred from burns, stained with flour. For 30 years he had thought his work didn't matter. Just bread, just food, nothing important. But Jesus was saying, "You matter, every loaf you bake with care. Every morning you rise in the dark. Every customer you greet with kindness. You are salt. You are preserving something, feeding something, healing something, not in a grand way, but in the way that matters most, the quiet, daily, invisible way. Thomas felt his throat tighten. For the first time in years, his work felt sacred, not because it was religious, but because it was love, and love is always sacred. Your ordinary work matters more than you know. Not far from Abigail sat a young man named Nathaniel. He was a lamp maker, spent his days bent over oil lamps, trimming wicks, pouring oil, making sure each one burned clean and bright. When Jesus said, "You are the light of the world," Nathaniel looked up. He knew how light worked. You don't light a lamp and then cover it with a bowl. That's insane. You put it on a stand so it can light up the whole house. But Nathaniel had spent years trying to cover his light. He believed in Jesus, followed his teachings, but quietly, privately, because speaking up meant losing customers, meant arguments with family, meant being different. But Jesus was saying, you can't hide light. It's impossible. Light either shines or it doesn't exist. And if you try to hide it, you're not protecting yourself. You're extinguishing what you were made to be. Nathaniel sat very still. The sun was lowering in the sky, casting long shadows across the hillside, and he realized his whole life he'd been afraid of being too bright. But the world was dark, and it needed his light. Even if it was just a small flame, even if it only lit one room, it mattered. You don't have to be the sun. Just let your light shine. An older woman named Sarah sat with her granddaughter on her lap. Sarah had lived quietly her whole life, never caused trouble, never stood out. She cooked meals for her family, tended her small garden, said her prayers at night. Nothing remarkable, nothing the world would remember. When Jesus said, "A city on a hill cannot be hidden," Sarah thought, "But I'm not a city. I'm just me." Then she felt her granddaughter shift in her lap. The little girl looked up at her, eyes bright. "Grandmother," she whispered, "do you think I can be light too?" Sarah's breath caught because she realized this child had been watching. Watching Sarah pray, watching her give food to beggars, watching her forgive when others held grudges. Sarah had thought no one was paying attention, but this little girl had seen everything. And because of what she'd seen, she believed in a God who was kind, a God who noticed, a God worth following. Sarah wasn't a city, but she was light, and one small light had changed a child's world. Jesus wasn't king about being famous. He was talking about being faithful. And faithfulness is always noticed by someone. Your life is being watched. Make it worth seeing. Near the front, an older man named Joseph listened carefully. He had lived through decades of Roman occupation, seen friends killed, watched his people oppressed, and he had learned to keep his head down, to blend in, to survive. But when Jesus said, "A city on a hill cannot be hidden," Joseph thought of Jerusalem. At night, you could see it from miles away, lamps burning in every window, fires in courtyards, the whole city glowing against the dark sky. You couldn't miss it, you couldn't ignore it. And Jesus was saying, that's what you are, not hidden, not blending in, but visible, regent, unmistakable. Joseph felt something stir in his chest, something he thought had died years ago. Hope. Maybe his life wasn't meant to be small. Maybe faithfulness didn't mean disappearing. Maybe it meant shining, even if it cost him everything God made you to shine, not to hide. Jesus looked out over the crowd. "Let your light shine before others," he said, "so they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven." This was the purpose of light, not to glorify yourself, but to point people to God. There was a young girl sitting with her mother, maybe 10 years old. She had watched her mother give away bread when they barely had enough, had seen her father stop on the road to help a stranger fix a broken cart. Her parents never talked about it, never made a show. They just did it. And because of that, the girl believed in a God who was kind, a God who cared, a God who showed up in the small moments. That's what Jesus meant. Your good deeds aren't meant to make people say, "Wow, look at you." They're meant to make people say, "Wow, look at you." They're meant to make people say, "Wow, look at your God." Because when people see light in you, they don't wonder about you. They wonder about the source. Rest in that. You are salt. You are light. Chapter 4. The Law Fulfilled. As Jesus, Chapter 4, the Law Fulfilled, spoke about salt and light, a question began forming in the minds of those listening. The scribes and Pharisees taught the law of Moses with rigid precision. Every rule, every commandment, every detail mattered. And now here was Jesus talking about mercy and meekness, about hearts instead of rituals. Was he abandoning the law? And a scribe named Eli sat near the middle of the crowd. He had spent his life studying Torah, copying it by hand, teaching it in the synagogue. The law was everything to him, and he was afraid. Jesus was about to tear it down. But then Jesus spoke, and Eli's fear gave way to wonder. "Do not think I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them. Fulfill. Not destroy, not replace. Fulfill." Eli leaned forward. What did that mean? Jesus continued, "Until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen, will disappear from the law. The smallest letter in Hebrew, that was the yod tiny, barely more than a dot." But Jesus was saying even that matters. Every word, every promise, every prophecy, it all mattered, and it was all leading somewhere to him. Eli thought of the sacrifices in the temple, the lamb slain every year for the sins of the people. Was Jesus saying he was the lamb the law had always pointed toward? The thought made Eli's hands tremble. Beside Eli sat a younger scribe named Benjamin. Benjamin had grown up memorizing the 613 commandments. Every thou shalt and thou shalt not. He knew them all, but lately they'd started to feel like chains. Don't do this. Don't touch that. Don't go there. The law told him what was wrong, but it never gave him the power to do what was right. When Jesus said, "I have not come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it," Benjamin felt something shift. Fulfill, like a jar waiting to be filled, like a promise waiting to be kept, like a map that finally leads you home. The law had shown Benjamin where to go, but Jesus was offering to carry him there. Benjamin closed his eyes. For the first time, the law didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a gift, pointing him toward the one who could actually save him. The law shows the way. Jesus walks it with you. A younger man named Aaron sat nearby. He had grown up hearing that righteousness meant following rules. Don't work on Sabbath. Don't eat unclean food. Don't touch the dead. He had tried, he really had. But it never felt like enough. When Jesus said, "Unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven," Aaron's heart sank. The Pharisees were the most righteous people he knew. They memorized scripture, fasted twice a week, tithed on everything, even their garden herbs. How could anyone's righteousness surpass theirs? But then Aaron realized Jesus wasn't talking about doing more. He was talking about understanding what the law was really for. The law had three purposes, three gifts from God. First, the law is a mirror. It shows you who you really are, not who you pretend to be, not who you wish you were, but the truth. You look into the law and see I'm angry, I'm lustful, I'm greedy, I need help. The mirror doesn't save you, but it shows you that you need saving. Second, the law is a wall. It protects. Even people who don't know God benefit when society honors father and mother, when people don't steal, don't murder, don't lie. The law restrains evil. It holds back chaos. It makes community possible. Without it, the world would tear itself apart. Third, the law is a lamp for those who love God. The law becomes a guide, not a way to earn salvation that's already yours. 3. Grace but a path to walk. It shows you how to love well, how to honor God, how to become who you were created to be, not through striving, but through following. Aaron sat very still. He had been using the law like a ladder, trying to climb his way to God. But Jesus was saying the law was never a ladder. It's a mirror, a wall, and a lamp. And if you see it clearly, it all points to him. You don't earn God's favor, you receive it. Near the back, a woman named Naomi listened with tears in her eyes. She had broken the law years ago in a way she could never undo, and she had believed ever since that God could never love her again. But Jesus wasn't talking about perfection. He was talking about the heart. The law said, "Don't murder." But Jesus would go deeper. "Don't even hate." The law said, "Don't commit adultery." But Jesus would go deeper. "Don't even lust." The law dealt with actions. Jesus dealt with the heart. And Naomi realized if righteousness was about the heart, then there was hope for her because God could change hearts. Even hers. She didn't have to stay stuck in the past. She could be made new. The law had shown her what she couldn't do on her own. And now, Jesus was offering to do it for her. Let him change you. You don't have to do it alone. There was a Pharisee in the crowd named Nicodemus. He hadn't come to mock. He'd come because something in him was hungry, restless. He knew the law perfectly, could recite it forward and backward, had built his entire life around keeping it. But when Jesus said, "Unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees," Nicodemus felt something crack open in his chest. Because he knew deep down, he knew his righteousness was external performance. A costume he wore so well, even he believed it sometimes. But underneath he was just as broken as everyone else, maybe more. Because at least they knew they needed help. Jesus looked out over the crowd, and for just a moment, his eyes met Nicodemus's. And in that look, Nicodemus saw something that terrified and comforted him at the same time. Jesus saw through him, saw past the robes, past the titles, past the performance, saw the hungry, restless, broken man underneath, and still looked at him with love. That night, Nicodemus would go home. He wouldn't sleep, and in a few weeks, he would come back to Jesus in the dark, in secret. And he would ask the question that had been burning in him since this moment. How can a man be born again? Because he finally understood keeping the law couldn't save him. Only being born again could. God sees past your performance, and he loves what he sees. Jesus looked out over the crowd. The law was never meant to save you, he said. It was meant to show you that you need a savior. And in that moment, hundreds of people understood. The law was a mirror, a wall, a lamp. It showed them the cracks, protected them from chaos, guided them toward love. But Jesus was the one who could heal it all, not by lowering the standard, but by meeting it himself and then offering his righteousness to anyone who would receive it. Eli, the old scribe, felt something shift in his chest. He had spent his life trying to keep the law, and he had failed. Every single day he failed. But maybe that was the point. Maybe the law was never meant to be the destination. It was meant to be the signpost pointing to Jesus. And now, sitting on this hillside, Eli finally understood the law wasn't abolished. It was completed in him. Rest in that completion. It is finished. Chapter 5. The Deeper Righteousness. Chapter 5. The Deeper Righteousness. After establishing that he came to fulfill the law, Jesus did something that must have left the crowd breathless. He began to reinterpret it. 6 times he used the same phrase. You have heard it say, but I say to you, and each time he took something familiar and pushed it deeper, past actions into the heart. There was a man in the crowd named Judah. He was a merchant, sold grain in the marketplace, had a wife, 3 children, and a brother he hadn't spoken to in 5 years. It started over an inheritance. Their father had died and left the land to both of them. But Judah thought he deserved more. He was the eldest. He had worked the land longer. They argued, said things that couldn't be unsaid, and one day Judah walked away. He told himself it didn't matter. He hadn't killed his brother. He hadn't even touched him. So according to the law, he was fine. But when Jesus spoke the first contrast, Judah felt his stomach drop. You have heard it was said, "You shall not murder." But I tell you, anyone who is angry with his brother is subject to judgment. Angry. Judah was more than angry. He was bitter, resentful. He nursed his grievance like a wound he refused to let heal. And Jesus was saying, that's murder. Not with a knife, but with the heart. Because murder doesn't begin when the blade is drawn. It begins with the thought, the hatred, the moment you decide someone is worthless to you. Judah thought of his brother's face. The way it had looked that last day, flushed with anger, eyes full of hurt. They had been close once as boys. They had worked the fields together, laughed together, shared everything. But somewhere along the way, Judah had stopped seeing his brother as a person. He'd started seeing him as an obstacle, a rival, an enemy. And every day since, Judah had killed him a little more in his heart. He pictured his brother's children, growing up without knowing their cousins, growing up believing family meant bitterness and broken promises. He pictured his own children, learning from him that grudges were more important than forgiveness, and he realized the Radha wasn't just destroying his brother, it was destroying him. That night, Judah would go home. He would lie awake, staring at the ceiling. And before dawn, he would make a decision. He would go to his brother's house. He would knock on the door, and he would say the words he'd been too proud to say for 5 years. "I'm sorry." Not because his brother deserved it, but because Judah couldn't carry the weight anymore. Let go of the anger. It's only hurting you. Not far away sat a young man named Asher. He was engaged to be married. In 3 months, he would stand under the wedding canopy with a woman named Rachel. A good woman, kind, faithful. But lately, Asher's mind had been wandering. There was another woman in the village, beautiful. She didn't belong to him, but he thought about her, imagined her, let his eyes linger when she passed. He told himself it didn't matter. He wasn't going to do anything. It was just thoughts. But when Jesus spoke the second contrast, Asher felt his face burn. "You have heard it was said, 'You shall not commit adultery.' But I tell you, anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery in his heart. Already committed. Not if you act on it, but if you think it, because adultery doesn't begin in the bed. It begins in the mind, in the look that lingers too long, in the fantasy that replaces reality." Asher had been telling himself, "It's just a thought. It's not hurting anyone." But Jesus wasn't letting him off that easy. Then Jesus said something that made the whole crowd go still. "If your right eye causes you to sin, gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell." Gouge it out. Asher felt his stomach turn. Jesus wasn't speaking literally. He wasn't telling people to mutilate themselves. That would contradict everything he taught about the body, being God's temple. But he was saying something shocking, something that couldn't be softened or explained away. Sin is serious, deadly serious, not because God is harsh, but because sin destroys. It doesn't just stain you, it devours you. And Jesus was saying, you should be willing to lose anything to be free from it. If your eye leads you to lust, stop looking, delete the app. Change the route you walk, cut off access. Whatever it takes, if your hand leads you to sin, stop reaching, quit the job, end the relationship, walk away from the money. Not in a spirit of self-punishment, but in a spirit of self-love because you are worth saving. And sin is not worth keeping. Asher sat with his head in his hands. He had been playing with fire thinking he could control it. But Jesus was saying, you can't, it will consume you. That night, Asher would go home and confess. Not just the thoughts, but the places he went, the compromises he made, the small choices that fed the hunger. He would tell Rachel, not because he had to, but because he wanted to be free. Free from the secret, free from the shame, free from the slow death of a divided heart. And he would make a plan, practical, specific, to cut off every path that led him toward destruction. Not because he was strong enough to resist, but because he finally understood he wasn't, and that honesty, that was the beginning of freedom. Guard your heart. Sin is more dangerous than you think. Near the edge of the crowd, a woman named Leah sat alone. She had been married once for 6 months, until her husband decided he didn't want her anymore. No reason, no adultery, no abuse. He just grew tired of her, and according to the law, that was enough. He gave her a certificate of divorce, and she was cast out. Now she lived with her father. A burden, a shame, unmarriageable. When Jesus spoke the third contrast, Leah's hands trembled. It has been aid. Anyone who divorces his wife must give her a certificate of divorce. But I tell you, anyone who divorces his wife, except for sexual immorality, causes her to commit adultery. Jesus wasn't talking about rules. He was talking about people, about women like Leah, who had done nothing wrong but were thrown away like broken pottery. He was saying this is not what God intended. Marriage is a covenant, a bond, not a contract you tear up when it's inconvenient. And when you break that covenant, you don't just hurt your spouse, you shatter something sacred. Leah closed her eyes. For years, she had believed the divorce was her fault, that she was defective somehow. But Jesus was saying, no, you were sinned against. And God sees that. He sees the ones who are abandoned, the ones who are used and discarded, the ones the law failed to protect, and he calls it what it is, wrong. Leah wept quietly, not from sadness, but from relief, because someone finally saw, you are seen. You are not forgotten. A merchant named Tobias listened closely to the fourth contrast. He was known for his word. If Tobias made a promise, you could count on it. But lately, his promises had grown elaborate. He swore by heaven, by the temple, by his own life. Because somewhere along the way, simple honesty wasn't enough anymore. When Jesus spoke, Tobias felt the words land like stones. You have heard it was said, do not break your oath. But I tell you, do not swear at all. Let your yes be yes, and your no be no, simpler, honest, trustworthy. No elaborate promises, no dramatic vows, just truth. Tobias realized, if you have to swear to be believed, something is broken. Your word should be enough. That's what integrity looks like. Not impressive oaths, but consistent truthfulness. Speak simply. Speak honestly. Near the front sat a man named Eli. He had been wronged publicly. His business partner had cheated him, stolen from him, and walked away laughing. And Eli wanted justice. A for eye, tooth for tooth. Fair was fair. But when Jesus spoke the fifth contrast, Eli felt his whole world tilt. You have heard it was said, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the thirsty, also, turn the other cheek also. Turn the other cheek. Eli's first thought was, that's insane. Let them hit you again. Let them take advantage. That's not justice. That's weakness. But then Eli thought about what revenge had done to him. It had consumed him, made him bitter, turned him into someone he didn't recognize. Every time he thought about getting even, the anger grew, and the anger was poisoning him from the inside. Maybe Jesus wasn't talking about weakness. Maybe he was talking about freedom. Freedom from the endless cycle of revenge. Freedom from letting someone else's evil control your response. When you refuse to retaliate, you take away their power. You stop the poison from spreading. That's not weakness. That's the most radical kind of strength. Let go of the need to get even. And then Jesus spoke the final impossible command. You have heard it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Love your enemies. A woman named Anna sat near the back, holding her daughter's hand. Her daughter's father, Anna's former husband, had abandoned them both, left them with nothing, no support, no explanation. Anna hated him, and she felt justified in that hatred. But when Jesus said, love your enemies, something cracked open in her chest. Not because it was easy, but because she realized hatred was a chain, and she was tired of carrying it. Jesus wasn't saying, pretend they didn't hurt you. He was saying, don't let their evil define you. Love them, not because they deserve it, but because you do. You deserve to be free. Anna closed her eyes. She didn't know if she could do it, but maybe she didn't have to. Not all at once. Maybe she could just start by praying. One small prayer, God help me let go. And maybe that would be enough. You don't have to forgive perfectly. Just begin. Jesus looked out over the crowd. The sun was lowering now. Golden light spilled across the backhill hillside. Be perfect, he said, as your heavenly Father is perfect. Perfect. The word hung heavy in the air. But Jesus didn't mean flawless. He meant complete whole, mature in love. Love the way your Father loves, without conditions, without limits, without keeping score. Not perfectly, but truly. And every time you choose love over hate, mercy over revenge, grace over judgment, you become a little more like him, a little more whole. Rest in that process. You're becoming chapter 6, giving, praying, fasting. Chapter 6, giving, praying, fasting. After teaching about the heart behind the law, Jesus turned to 3 practices central to Jewish faith. Giving to the poor, prayer, fasting, good things, holy things, but they could be twisted, done for the wrong reasons. And Jesus said, be careful, because when you do the right thing for the wrong reason, it loses all its power. There was a man named Simeon who sat near the middle of the crowd. He was wealthy, not extravagantly rich, but comfortable, and he gave generously to the poor. But when he gave, he made sure people noticed. He teamed his donations, for when the synagogue was full, dropped coins into the collection box with a loud clatter, smiled when people turned to see, and it felt good, the admiration, the respect, the reputation as a generous man. But when Jesus spoke, Simeon felt something cold settle in his stomach. When you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets, as the hypocrites do. They have received their reward in full. Hypocrites. Simeon didn't think of himself that way. He really did care about the poor, but he also cared about being seen. And Jesus was saying, you can't have both. You get to choose applause from people or reward from God, but not both. Simeon sat very still, the sun warm on his face, the grass soft beneath him, and he realized all the applause in the world couldn't fill the emptiness he felt, because deep down he knew he wasn't giving out of love. He was giving out of need, the need to be admired, to be known, to matter. But Jesus was offering something better, intimacy with God, the joy of knowing he saw that the gift mattered to him. That night, Simeon would give again, but differently, quietly, with no one watching, and for the first time it would feel like worship. Give quietly. God sees. Not far away, a woman named Miriam listened carefully. She prayed every day, long, eloquent prayers. She knew all the right words. But lately, prayer felt like performance. She prayed loudest when others were near, stood in prominent places during the call to prayer, made sure her devotion was visible. When Jesus spoke about prayer, Miriam felt her face flush. When you pray, do not be like the hypocrites who love to pray, standing in the synagogues and on street corners to be seen by others. They have received their reward in full. Reward in full, the applause, the reputation, the admiration. That's all they'd get, and it was hollow. Jesus continued, but when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. Then your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you. Secret. Miriam realized prayer wasn't supposed to be a speech for an audience. It was a conversation between her and God, no one else. That night she would go into her small room, close the door, and for the first time in years, he would pray without performing. No fancy words, no eloquent phrase. Just, God, I'm tired, and I need you. And in the silence that followed, she would feel something she hadn't felt in years. His presence, not applause, not admiration, but something better him. Pray simply, he's listening. A young man named Ethan sat near the front. He fasted regularly, twice a week, like the Pharisees. And when he fasted, he made sure everyone knew. He wore his fasting like a badge, looked somber, spoke weakly. Let people see how spiritual he was. When Jesus spoke about fasting, Ethan felt the words cut deep. When you fast, do not look somber as the hypocrites do. They disfigure their faces to show others they are fasting. They have received their reward in full. Disfigure, Ethan had been doing exactly that, making himself look pitiful. So people would be impressed by his devotion. But Jesus said, if you're fasting for applause, you're missing the point. But when you fast, put oil on your head and wash your face, so it will not be obvious to others that you are fasting, except to your Father who is unseen. Wash your face, look normal, let no one know but God. Because fasting isn't about showing people how spiritual you are. It's about drawing near to God when no one's watching. Ethan went home that night and washed his face, combed his hair, smiled at his neighbors, and for the first time, fasting felt like freedom. Do it for him, not for them. Near the back, an older woman named Rachel listened and wept quietly. She had been giving, praying, and fasting for years, but not for show. She gave because she had been poor once and remembered the hunger. She prayed because she needed God to breathe. She fasted because it cleared her mind and softened her heart. No one cue, no one saw, and sometimes she wondered if it even mattered. But when Jesus said, your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you, Rachel felt something warm settle in her chest. He saw every quiet gift, every whispered prayer, every hidden sacrifice. God saw it all, and that was enough, more than enough. You don't need approval. He sees you. Jesus looked out over the crowd. 3 practices, 3 opportunities to draw near to God. And he said, do them all in secret, not because secrecy is holy, but because secrecy is holy, but because secrecy protects your heart. When you do good in front of others, pride creeps in. Your motive shifts. The applause becomes the reward. But when you do it in secret, when only God sees, your heart stays pure. You're free to love without calculation, free to give without keeping score, free to pray without performing. That's the hidden life with God, and it's the most beautiful life there is. Rest in His gaze. You are seen. Chapter 7. The Lord's Prayer. After Chapter 7, the Lord's Prayer, teaching about giving, praying and fasting in secret, Jesus paused. The crowd had been listening for hours. Some shifted their weight, others closed their eyes, letting the words wash over them. And then Jesus did something remarkable. He gave them a prayer, not a formula to recite mindlessly, but a pattern, a way of approaching God that would shape their hearts forever. There was a fisherman named Andrew in the crowd. Not Andrew the disciple, but another Andrew, a quiet man who had always struggled to pray. He didn't know the right words, couldn't quote scripture like the Pharisees. His prayers felt clumsy, inadequate. When Jesus said, "This is how you should pray," Andrew leaned forward. Maybe this time he would finally understand. Our Father in heaven, the first two words changed everything. Father, in Aramaic, the word was Abba, Papa, Daddy. An old woman named Sarah sat near the back. She had grown up believing God was distant, angry, always watching for mistakes. But Jesus said, "When you pray, call Him Father, not Master, not Judge, Father." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She had never had a father who was safe. Hers had been harsh, unpredictable. But Jesus was saying, God is different. He's the Father you always needed. The one who runs toward you, not away. The one whose arms are open always. And notice Jesus didn't say, "My Father." He said, "Our Father." When you pray, you're not alone. You're part of a family, a global, eternal family. All held in the same Father. All held in the same love. You belong. You're not alone. Hallowed be your name. Before asking for anything, Jesus said, "Pause worship." There was a merchant named Benjamin in the crowd. He usually came to God with a list, needs, requests, problems to solve. But Jesus was saying, before you ask for anything, remember who you're talking to. Hallowed, holy, set apart. God is not like anything else. Not a genie, not a therapist, but the creator of everything. And when you remember that, something shifts. You stop demanding. You start trusting. Because if God is truly God, if He holds the stars and knows every sparrow, then He can handle your problems too. Pause and remember who He is. Your kingdom come. Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. A young woman named Deborah whispered the words along with Jesus. She had been praying for years for things to change, for her circumstances to improve, for life to be easier. But Jesus was teaching her to pray differently. Not "My kingdom come," but "Your kingdom." Not "My will be done," but "Your will." In heaven, God's will is done perfectly. No rebellion, no resistance, just harmony. And Jesus was saying, pray for that here in your life, in your family, in your world. It's a dangerous prayer, because if you mean it, God will answer. And His kingdom often comes in unexpected ways, through surrender, through letting go, through the death of your own plans, so His purposes can rise. But it's worth it because where His kingdom is, there is peace. Let His will be done. Give us today our daily bread. After the lofty heavenly petitions, Jesus brought it back down to earth, to the simple physical needs of life. Bread. A widow named Esther sat clutching her shawl. She had 3 children at home, and she didn't know how she would feed them tomorrow. When Jesus said, "Give us today our daily bread," Esther felt something loosen in her chest. Not for next year, not for the rest of her life, just for today. Because when you ask daily, you remember daily. You need Him. Every breath, every bite, every moment, all of it is grace. Esther closed her eyes. Tomorrow felt impossible, but today she had enough. Not always the food she wanted, not always comfort or ease. Sometimes, like Job, the bread was tears, the provision was strength to endure one more day. Sometimes, like the Israelites in the wilderness, the bread was just enough, no more, no less. Manna for today. Trust required for tomorrow. God doesn't promise to remove every trial. He doesn't cause the suffering. The world is broken, and pain is real. but he promises to walk through it with you, to give you what your soul needs, even when your body aches, to work all things, not make all things good, but work them for the good of those who love him. And tomorrow, when tomorrow came, he would be there. Not always to remove the trial, but always to provide the grace to face it. He always had. He always would. You have enough for today. Trust him for tomorrow. And forgive us our debts as we also have forgiven our debtors. A man named Jacob sat very still when Jesus spoke those words. Because Jacob was holding a grudge, his neighbor owed him money, had owed him for 2 years, and Jacob thought about it every day. The injustice, the disrespect. But Jesus was linking two things, God's forgiveness of you and your forgiveness of others, not because you earn God's forgiveness by forgiving others, but because when you truly understand how much you've been forgiven, you can't help but forgive. Jacob thought of all the times he'd failed, all the ways he'd hurt people, all the debts he owed to God that he could never repay, and God had forgiven him completely, without hesitation. How could he withhold that same grace from his neighbor? That night, Jacob would go to his neighbor's house, not to demand payment, but to say, "It's forgiven, the debt is gone." And in that moment, Jacob would discover something. Forgiveness doesn't just free the other person, it frees you. Forgive, not because they deserve it, but because you do, and lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. A young man named Daniel sat with his head bowed. He had been struggling with anger, with lust, with choices that pulled him away from God, and he was tired. When Jesus said, "Lead us not into temptation," Daniel realized he didn't have to fight alone. This was a prayer of humility, of admitting I'm weak, I can't do this on my own. So guide me away from danger, protect me from myself, and deliver me from the evil one. Because evil is real, the enemy is real, but God is stronger. And when you pray this prayer, you're asking for divine protection, not because you're powerful, but because He is. Daniel took a deep breath. Tomorrow he would face the same temptations. But tonight he prayed, and that was enough. You don't have to be strong, just honest. For yours is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. Amen. The prayer ended where it began, with worship. Not mine is the kingdom, but yours. Not my power, but yours. All glory goes to Him forever. A young girl sat with her mother listening. She didn't understand all the words, but she understood the feeling. Safety, belonging, love, and she knew when she prayed like this, she was home. You are all home, rest here. Now the prayer will be spoken slowly 3 times like a lullaby. Listen, let the words settle into your heart. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we also have forgiven our debtors, and lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. For yours is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. Amen. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we also have forgiven our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. For yours is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. Amen. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we also have forgiven our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. For yours is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. Go, go. Let this prayer be the rhythm of your heart tonight as you hail. May these words echo in your soul. You are held, you are loved, you are forgiven. Rest now, child of God. Chapter 8, Treasures in Heaven. Chapter 8, Treasures in Heaven. Chapter 8, Treasures in Heaven. After teaching them how to pray, Jesus turned to something that occupied much of their thoughts. Treasure, what they valued, what they pursued, what they believed would make them secure. And Jesus said, "Be very careful what you treasure, because wherever your treasure is, your heart will follow." There was a farmer named Levi in the crowd. He had worked his whole life to buy more land, more fields, more grain to store. Every harvest, he told himself, just a little more. Then I'll have enough. Then I'll be safe. But the enough never came. When Jesus said, "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth," Levi felt the words land heavy in his chest. Treasures on earth. Everything Levi had worked for could be lost. Moths could eat through his finest clothes. Rust could corrode his tools. Thieves could break through the mud walls of his storehouse and steal everything. He had spent decades building security, but it was also fragile. Jesus continued, "But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and rust do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal." Treasures in heaven. Levi closed his eyes and tried to imagine what did treasure in heaven feel like. Not gold, not land. Those were cold, hard things you could hold in your hand. But maybe treasure in heaven was different. Maybe it was the warmth that spread through his chest the day he helped his neighbor rebuild a collapsed roof. No payment, no audience, just two men working in silence, and the satisfaction of doing something right. Maybe it was the look in his daughter's eyes when he told her for the first time in her life, "I'm proud of you." The way her face lit up, the way she threw her arms around him. Maybe it was that moment, years ago when he knelt alone in his field at dawn, the dew soaking his knees, the sun just breaking over the hills, and he felt just for a heartbeat, like he wasn't alone, like someone was there listening, loving him. Those moments didn't fill his barns, but they filled something deeper, a place in his soul that gold could never reach, and moths couldn't eat them, rust couldn't touch them, thieves couldn't steal them. They were his forever. That was treasure in heaven, not something far away, but something already growing inside you. Every act of love, every choice for good, every moment of true connection, store up what matters, let go of the rest. Not far away. A young woman named Tamar listened carefully. She had always been careful with money, saved every coin, wore the same clothes, year after year. But it wasn't generosity that motivated her. It was fear. Fear of not having enough. Fear of being vulnerable. Fear of losing control. When Jesus said, "Where your treasure is, there your heart will be." Also, Tamar realized something. Her treasure wasn't money. It was security. And her heart had followed it into a prison of anxiety. She was so busy protecting what she had. She'd forgotten how to live. That evening, as the sun lowered, Tamar made a choice. She would give not everything, but something. She would take a step toward trust, toward believing that God would key, Ravid, and in that small act, she would taste freedom. Your heart follows your treasure. Choose wisely. Jesus looked out over the crowd. "The eye is the lamp of the body," he said. "If your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light." There was a merchant named Isaac who understood. He had spent years comparing himself to others, looking at what they had, what he didn't have, and it had filled him with darkness, envy, resentment, bitterness. But Jesus was saying, what you focus on shapes everything. If you focus on lack, you'll live in darkness. If you focus on blessing, you'll live in light. Isaac closed his eyes. He had a choice. He could keep staring at what he didn't have, or he could open his eyes to what he did. A wife who loved him, children who were healthy, a roof over his head, food on his table. It wasn't much, but it was enough. And when he opened his eyes to it, light flooded in. Focus on what you have, not what you lack. Then Jesus said the words that made everyone shift uncomfortably. No one can serve two masters. You cannot serve both God and money. A wealthy man named Amos sat near the edge of the crowd. He had convinced himself he could do both, serve God on the Sabbath, serve money the rest of the week. But Jesus was saying it doesn't work that way, because masters demand loyalty and money is a jealous master. It demands your time, your worry, your compromises, your soul. You can use money, you can steward it, you can give it away, but you can't serve it and serve God. One will always win. Amos knew which one had been winning in his life. That night he would go home and open his account books, and he would make a plan not to give away everything, but to shift his allegiance to stop serving money and start serving God. Choose your master. You can't have both. Near the back, an older woman named Judith had been listening to everything J. Esses said. She had very little, a small room, a few coins, enough to eat barely. But when Jesus talked about treasures in heaven, Judith smiled because she had been storing them up for years. Every kindness, every prayer, every moment, she chose love over bitterness. No one knew, no one saw, but God did. And one day she would stand before him, and all those invisible treasures would be revealed, not as boasting, but as evidence that she had truly lived, that she had truly lived, that she had loved well, and that was worth more than all the gold in the world. You are storing up treasure even when you can see it. Jesus looked out over the crowd. The sun was lower now, casting long shadows across the hillside. Where your treasure is, he said again, there your heart will be also. And in that moment, hundreds of people made a choice to treasure what truly matters, to let go of what doesn't, to trust that God's economy works differently than the world's, and to build their lives on things that last. Rest in that truth. Your treasure is safe with him. Chapter 9. Consider the lilies. After chapter 9, consider the lilies. Speaking about treasure and masters, Jesus knew what they were feeling. Anxiety. Because if you can't serve money, if you can't hoard and protect yourself, then how do you survive? And so, Jesus spoke the words that have brought peace to millions. Do not worry. There was a woman named Hannah in the crowd. She had 3 children. Her husband had died the year before, and every night she lay awake wondering, how will I feed them tomorrow? The worry consumed her. It sat in her chest like a stone. When Jesus said, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, Hannah almost laughed. Easy for him to say. But then Jesus pointed to the sky. Look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you much more valuable than they? Hannah looked up. A sparrow darted past, wings catching the light. Then another. They dipped and soared unburdened. They didn't plant crops, didn't have storehouses, but every day they found what they needed because the Father fed them. And Jesus was saying, if he feeds them, he will feed you. You are worth more to him than 1,000 birds. Hannah felt the stone in her chest begin to crack. Maybe she didn't have to carry it alone. Let the worry go. He's carrying you. A farmer named Joel sat with his head in his hands. The harvest had been poor. He owed rent on his land, and he didn't know how he would pay. When Jesus said, can any one of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your life? Joel looked up. He had spent months worrying, sleepless nights, constant anxiety, and it hadn't changed anything. Worry was powerless. It couldn't fix problems, couldn't extend life, couldn't change the future. All it could do was rob him of the present, the moment where God was with him, where breath filled his lungs, where he was alive. Joel took a deep breath. Tomorrow would come, but tonight he was okay. And tomorrow, when it came, God would be there too. Right now you're okay. Just breathe. Then Jesus turned their eyes downward to the wild flowers blooming across the hillside. And why do you worry about clothes? See how the flowers of the field grow. Imagine them now. Close your eyes and see them. A field of wild flowers stretching out beneath the warm sun. Red anemones, petals bright as blood. Purple cyclans nodding in the breeze. White narcissus glowing like stars against the green. Each one different, each one unique. Some just beginning to open, their edges still curled tight, holding the morning dew like jewels in their palms. Others fully bloomed, petals spread wide, drinking in the light, soaking in the warmth. The breeze moves through them, gentle, unhurried. They sway, they bend, they dance, and they do nothing. They don't labor, they don't spin thread, they don't weave cloth. They simply are. They grow because that's what they were made to do. They bloom because the sun calls them forth, and they're beautiful. Impossibly, heartbreakingly beautiful. Not because they tried, but because God made them that way. Jesus looked at the crowd. They do not labor or spin. Yet I tell you that not even Solomon in all his splendor was dressed like one of these. Solomon, the richest king Israel had ever known, his robes woven from the finest linen dyed purple, embroidered with gold, he was magnificent. But Jesus said, Even Solomon in all his glory wasn't dressed like a single wild flower, because Solomon's beauty was manufactured, bought, designed. But the lily was clothed by God, and there is no comparison. You don't have to make yourself beautiful. He already has. A young woman named Ruth sat listening. She had always felt plain, ordinary, nothing special. But when Jesus spoke about the lies, something shifted. If God clothed the flowers in such beauty, and they would fade in a few weeks, how much more would he clothe her? She who was made in his image, who carried his breath in her lungs, who was loved with an everlasting love. God wasn't careless with her. He was tender, intentional, loving, and if he cared for flowers, he cared for her even more. Ruth looked down at her rough, worn robe, and for the first time she felt beautiful, not because of what she wore, but because of who made her. You are clothed in his love. That's all you need, Jesus continued. If that is how God clothed the grass of the field, which is here today, and tomorrow is thrown into the fire, will he not much more into the fire? Will he not much more clothe you? O you of little faith. Little faith. He wasn't mocking them. He was naming what they already knew. Their faith was small, fragile, easily shaken. But even small faith is enough. Because faith isn't about the size of your belief. It's about the size of your God. And your God is big enough to feed the birds, big enough to clothe the lies, big enough to hold you. Your faith doesn't have to be perfect, just real. Then Jesus said the words again like a refrain, like a lullaby. So do not worry, saying, what shall we eat? Or what shall we drink? Or what shall we wear? An older man named Ezra closed his eyes and listened. He had worried his whole life about everything. But Jesus was saying, the pagans worry, the babes who don't know God, but you have a Father, and he knows what you need. Before you ask, before you worry, before you even know you need it, he knows and he's already working. Ezra felt years of tension begin to drain from his shoulders. He didn't have to figure it all out. He didn't have to control everything. He could just trust he is already working. You don't have to. But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. This was the key. A young man named Caleb had been chasing security his whole life. More money, more status, more control. But Jesus was saying, chase me instead. Seek my kingdom, my ways, my heart, and everything else. I'll take care of it, not because you earned it, but because I'm your father. And that's what fathers do. Caleb took a breath. For years he'd had it backward. He'd been seeking security and hoping to find God along the way. But Jesus was saying, seek God and security will follow. Seek him first. Everything else will follow. And then Jesus spoke the final words of this teaching. Therefore do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. Tomorrow hasn't come yet, and when it does, God will meet you there with the same faithfulness, the same provision, the same love. You don't have to face tomorrow tonight. You only have to face tomorrow tonight. You only have to face today. And today, you have everything you need. Tomorrow will take care of itself. Just be here now. Now the words will be repeated slowly like a prayer. Do not worry. Do not worry about tomorrow. Do not worry about your life. God is feeding the birds. God is clothing the lies, and he is caring for you right now in this moment. You are held. You are loved. You are safe. Do not worry. Let it go. Breathe. Rest. Tonight, you are like the lies. You don't have to do anything. Just be. Just rest. God is clothing you in his peace right now. Sleep deeply. He is near. Chapter 10. Judge not. Chapter 10. Judge not. After inviting them into the deep rest of trust, Jesus turned to how they saw others, how they judged, how they measured, how they pointed out flaws while ignoring their own. And Jesus said something that echoes across every generation. Do not judge. There was a man named Reuben in the crowd. He prided himself on his discernment. He could spot a sinner from across the marketplace. The tax collector, the woman with the questionable reputation, the man who didn't keep Sabbath properly. Reuben saw them all, and he judged them all. When Jesus said, do not judge, or you too will be judged." Reuben shifted uncomfortably. "For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged others, you will be measured to you. The same measure." Reuben had been harsh, critical, unforgiving. And Jesus was saying, whatever standard you use for others will be used for you. If you show no mercy, you'll receive no mercy. You'll receive no mercy. If you're quick to condemn, you'll be condemned. That night, Reuben would go home and lie awake, thinking of all the people he'd judged, all the harsh words he'd spoken, and he would realize he didn't want to be judged by that standard, because if God judged him the way he judged others, he would be lost. Judge gently. You'll need that mercy too. You need that mercy too. Then Jesus told a story that made the crowd laugh. "Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye?" A speck, tiny, almost invisible, versus a plank, a massive beam of wood. A woman named Abigail sat near the front, smiling despite herself, because she knew. She was quick to notice everyone else's faults, her sister's impatience, her neighbor's gossip, her friend's pride, but her own faults. Those were harder to see. Jesus continued, "How can you say to your brother, 'Let me take the speck out of your eye,' when all the time there is a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye." Hypocrite. Not to shame her, but to wake her up, because when you're focused on someone else's sin, you can't see your own. And when you can't see your own, you can't be healed. Abigail closed her eyes. She had been so busy fixing everyone else. She'd ignored her own heart. That night, she would stop. She would look inward, face her own pride, her own judgment, her own failure, and only then would she be able to help anyone else. Look at yourself first. Then you can see clearly. A young man named Seth had been hurt. His friend had betrayed him, gossiped about him, and Seth wanted to confront him, tell him exactly what he'd done wrong. But when Jesus spoke about the plank and the speck, Seth realized something. He wasn't innocent either. He had hurt people too, said things he shouldn't have, betrayed trust in small ways. Who was he to stand in judgment? Seth took a breath. Maybe instead of confronting his friend, he should start by asking for forgiveness for his own failures, his own planks. And then, from that place of humility, maybe reconciliation could begin. Humility opens the door to healing. Then Jesus added a strange saying, "Do not give dogs what is sacred. Do not throw your pearls to pigs." An older woman named Leah understood immediately. She had spent years trying to convince people who didn't want to be convinced, sharing truth with those who only wanted to mock it, and it had drained her. Jesus wasn't telling her to be exclusive. He was telling her to use wisdom. Some people aren't ready, and that's okay. You can't force someone to value what they don't understand. So offer it freely, humbly, but if it's rejected, let it go. Don't keep throwing pearls where they'll be trampled. Pray for them, love them, and trust that God will work in His time. Leah felt a weight lift. She didn't have to convince everyone. She just had to love them and leave the rest to God. Love them, but don't carry the weight of changing them. And then Jesus gave them one simple rule, one principle, that if followed would transform every relationship. So in everything do to others what you would have them do to you. For this sums up the law and the prophets. The golden rule. A merchant named Hosea sat listening. He had been cheating his customers. Small amounts. They didn't notice, but it added up. When Jesus said, "Do to others what you would have them do to you," Hosea felt his stomach turn because he wouldn't want to be cheated. He would want to be treated fairly, honestly, with respect. And that's how he should treat others. Not because they deserved it, but because that's the kind of person he wanted to be. That night, Hosea would change. He would make things right. Return what he'd taken, not out of fear, but because he finally understood. Treat others the way you want to be treated. It's that simple and that hard. Treat others the way you long to be treated. Near the back, a young woman named Miriam had been listening to everything. She had been judged her whole life for her appearance, her choices, her past. And when Jesus said, "Do not judge," she felt tears slip down her cheeks, because someone was finally saying, "You don't deserve that. No one does. Everyone is carrying something. Everyone is broken in some way. Everyone needs grace. And if you've received grace, You must give it." Miriam wiped her eyes. She had been so focused on the judgment she'd received, she hadn't noticed the judgment she'd given. But tonight, that would change. She would look at people the way she longed to be looked at, with compassion, with kindness, with the benefit of the doubt, because that's what the golden rule meant. Not treat people the way they've treated you, but treat them the way you wish they would, and maybe, just maybe, that would change the world. You've received grace. Now give it. Jesus looked out over the crowd. The sun was sinking lower, golden light spilled across the hills, and he had shown them a different way to live, not through judgment, but through mercy, not through criticism, but through compassion, not through keeping score, but through grace. Rest in that grace. You are not judged, you are loved. Chapter 11. Ask, seek, knock. Chapter 11. Ask, seek, knock. After teaching about judgment and the golden rule, Jesus returned to something deeply personal. Prayer, not the formal prayer he'd already taught them, but the raw, desperate, everyday kind. The kind that says, "God, I need you right now, please." And Jesus made a promise that would echo through centuries. Ask, and it will be given to you. There was a young mother named Naomi in the crowd. Her daughter had been sick for weeks. Fever that wouldn't break, cough that kept her awake at night. Naomi had prayed, begged, pleaded with God, but the sickness remained. When Jesus said, "Ask, and it will be given to you," Naomi felt anger rise in her chest. She had asked, and nothing had changed. But then Jesus continued, "Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be opened to you. Ask, seek, knock." 3 verbs, 3 invitations, not ask once and give up. But keep asking, keep seeking, keep knocking. Be persistent, be bold, be honest about what you need. And suddenly Naomi understood. Prayer wasn't about convincing God to care. He already cared. It was about drawing closer, about refusing to give up, about trusting that, even when she couldn't see it, he was working. That night, she would go home and keep praying, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Because she wanted to. Because prayer wasn't just about getting answers, it was about staying connected. Keep asking. He's listening. A fisherman named Peter sat listening. He had prayed for years for his business to succeed, for his nets to be full, for his family to be secure. And some days were good, some days were not. When Jesus said, "For everyone who asks, receives," Peter wondered, "Then why don't I always get what I ask for?" But then Jesus told a story. "Which of you, if your son asks for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, will give him a snake?" Peter understood immediately. He had 2 sons, and when they asked for food, he gave them food. Not rocks, not snakes. Even when they asked for things that weren't good for them, he gave them what they needed instead, because he loved them. And Jesus was saying, if you, broken and imperfect, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good gifts to those who ask him? Peter realized God wasn't ignoring his prayers. He was answering them, just not always the way Peter expected, because God saw the bigger picture, knew what Peter truly needed. And sometimes the answer was not yet. Sometimes it was something better, but it was always love. He's answering, just not always the answering, just not always the way you expect. An older man named Elias sat near the back. He had stopped praying years ago because it felt like shouting into the void. But when Jesus had said, "The one who seeks finds," something stirred in Elias's chest. Maybe he had given up too soon. Maybe prayer wasn't about getting immediate results. Maybe it was about the seeking itself, about the journey, the drawing near, the slow transformation that happens when you keep showing up. That night, Elias would pray again, just a small prayer, "God, are you there?" And in the silence that followed, he would feel something, not an answer in words, but a presence, warm, steady, real, and he would know he had been heard. Seek him, you will find him. Near the edge of the crowd sat a young man named Saul. He had heard everything: the Beatitudes, the Lord's Prayer, the call to love enemies, the invitation to ask, seek, knock, and he felt nothing. Not because the words weren't true. He could tell they were. There was something in Jesus' voice that rang like a bell, clear and unmistakable. But Saul wasn't ready. He was too angry, too proud, too wrapped up in his own plans to surrender them to some wandering teacher From Nazareth, he watched the others, the fisherman Peter, tears in his eyes, the widow Hannah clutching her shawl, hope dawning on her face, the merchant who looked like he'd just had his whole world turned upside down. And Saul felt a flicker of something. Envy, longing, but he pushed it down. When the crowd began to disperse, Saul stood, brushed the dust from his robe, and walked back down the hill. He didn't look back. Years later, he would remember this day and wonder, what if I had stayed? What if I had believed? But that day on that hillside, he simply walked away. Not everyone who hears will respond. And that's heartbreaking. Gee, but it's true. God never forces. He invites, and the invitation remains open. Always, even for those who walk away. Because sometimes the seeds planted on a hillside in Galilee take years to grow. Sometimes they lie dormant, waiting, until the soil of the heart is finally ready. And when that day comes, the seed will sprout, even in the hardest ground. He waits, even for those who walk away. A young woman named Hannah had been praying for a husband. She was getting older. All her friends were married, and she felt forgotten. When Jesus said, "Knock and the door will be opened," Hannah felt tears sting her eyes. She had been knocking for years and the door stayed closed. But then she realized, maybe the door she was knocking on wasn't the one God wanted to open. Maybe there was another door, another plan, another story. And maybe trusting God meant being willing to let him open the door he chose, not the one she wanted, but the one that led to life. Hannah closed her eyes. She didn't understand, but she chose to trust. And in that trust, she found peace. Trust him with the door. He knows which one to open. Then Jesus said something that changed everything. If you then, though you are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good gifts to those who ask him? Though you are evil, Jesus wasn't being cruel. He was being honest. Even broken people know how to tour, love their kids. Even flawed parents give good gifts. And if imperfect humans can do that, imagine what a perfect father can do. A widow named Esther sat weeping quietly. She had lost her husband, her son, her home, and she had believed God had abandoned her. But Jesus was saying, no, he hasn't. He's a father, and fathers don't abandon their children. The door is open, wide open, not because you're good, but because he is. But, and this was important, the open door still requires a response. An invitation is not the same as force. Love never forces. The door stands open to anyone, to everyone, to the widow, to the fisherman, to the tax collector, to you. But you have to walk through it. You have to ask, seek, knock. God will never drag you into his kingdom. He will only invite you, woo you, call your name in the stillness. And when you finally turn toward him, when you finally step through the door, you'll discover it was never locked. It was always open. He was always waiting. The door is open, but you have to walk through. Near the front, a young boy sat with his father. He didn't understand all the words, but he understood the feeling. God was like a father, a good father, the kind who listens, who cares, who gives good gifts. The boy leaned against his father's shoulder, and his father wrapped an arm around him. And in that moment, the boy understood prayer. It wasn't about fancy words or perfect requests. It was about coming to a father who loved him, and that father would never turn him away. You are never turned away. Come as you are. Jesus looked out over the crowd. Ask, he said. Seek, knock, not because God needs to be convinced, but because you need to draw near. And when you do, you'll find what you were looking for. Not always an answer, but always him, and he is enough. Sleep in that truth. He is with you always. Chapter 12, The Wise Builder's Rest. Chapter 12, The Wise Builder's Rest. Sun was lowering now. Shadows stretched long across the hillside. Jesus had been speaking for hours, and the crowd, though weary, had not left because they knew this moment was sacred. Now, as the sermon drew to a close, Jesus offered one final image. Not a warning, but an invitation. An invitation to rest on solid ground, enter through the narrow gate. Jesus said, there was a young man named Daniel in the crowd. He had been following the crowd his whole life, doing what everyone else did, going where everyone else went. It was easy, comfortable, safe. But when Jesus spoke about 2 gates, Daniel sat up. Wide is the gate, and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. The wide gate, the easy path. Everyone was walking through it. It required no effort, no sacrifice, no change, just drift. But Jesus said it led to destruction, not because God was waiting to punish, but because a life without purpose, without truth, without love, slowly destroys itself. But small is the gate and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it. The narrow gate, harder to find, fewer people walking through it. It required intention, willingness, surrender, but it led to life, real life. Daniel closed his eyes. He had been drifting, following the crowd, but tonight he would choose. He would find the narrow gate, even if it meant walking alone. Choose the path that leads to life, even if it's harder. Then Jesus spoke about recognizing true teaching. Watch out for false prophets. By their fruit you will recognize them. An older woman named Ruth had been deceived before. A teacher had come to her village, said all the right words, looked holy, sounded wise, but his life told a different story. He was cruel to his family, greedy with money, harsh with the poor. When Jesus said, "By their fruit you will recognize them," Ruth understood. Words are easy to fake, but fruit doesn't lie. A good tree bears good fruit. A bad tree bears bad fruit. You can't hide what you truly are. It shows up in how you live. Ruth thought of Jesus. His words were beautiful, but more than that, his life was beautiful. He touched lepers, ate with sinners, showed mercy to the broken. That was fruit, and it was good. Watch the life, not just the words. Then Jesus said something that made the sea, road grow quiet. Not everyone who says to me, "Lord, Lord," will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father. A man named Simon sat very still. He had been saying, "Lord, Lord," his whole life, attended synagogue, said prayers, looked righteous, but his heart was far away. Jesus was saying, faith is not just words, it's a life that aligns with God's heart, that reflects his love, that does his will. You can call him Lord all you want, but if your life doesn't show it, the words are empty. Simon took a breath. He had been performing, pretending, but tonight that would end. He would stop saying and start doing. Faith is shown in how you live. And then Jesus told the final story. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. There was a builder named Asher in the crowd. He knew what Jesus was talking about. Building a house was hard work, especially if you wanted it to last. You had to dig deep through soil, through sand, all the way down to bedrock. It took time. It was exhausting. No one saw it, but if you did it right, the house would stand. Jesus continued, "The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, yet it did not fall because it had its foundation on the rock." Asher thought of the houses he'd seen stand through storms, built slowly, carefully on stone. They didn't collapse, didn't wash away because the foundation was sure, and Jesus was saying, your life is the same. If you build it on his words, on his truth, on his love, it will stand, not because you're strong, but because the foundation is built on what lasts. Build on him. Jesus paused, then added, quietly, "But everyone who hears these words and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand." He didn't elaborate, didn't describe the collapse, didn't linger on the destruction, because this sermon was not about fear. It was about hope. The foolish builder made a choice, and choices have consequences. But tonight, Jesus wanted them to hear the other story. The story of the wise builder, the one who dug deep, who built on the rock, the one whose house stood. Build on the rock. That's the story that matters. Near the back, an older man named Eli listened carefully. He had spent his life building, not houses, but a reputation, a career, wealth, and all of it felt fragile. Now, when Jesus talked about the wise builder, Eli realized he had been building on sand, on things that could be lost, that would fade. That didn't matter in the end, but it wasn't too late. He could start building differently on the rock, on Jesus, on his words, on his kingdom. That night, Eli would go home and make changes. not because he had to, but because he wanted to. He wanted a foundation that would last. It's never too late. Start building on the rock. Jesus looked out over the crowd one last time. The sun was setting now, the sky painted in shades of rose and gold. The Sea of Galilee below them caught the light shimmering like hammered bronze. Everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man. Wise, not perfect, not flawless wise. Someone who listens, who learns, who builds slowly, carefully on what matters. And when the storms come, and they will come, they stand. Not because they're special, but because their foundation is sure. The crowd sat in silence. No one moved. Some closed their eyes, letting the last rays of sun warm their faces. Others simply sat, hands resting in their laps, feeling the weight of what they'd heard. A fisherman held his son's hand a little tighter. A widow looked up at the first stars beginning to appear and smiled through her tea. As a young man who had been angry for years felt the anger drain away, replaced by something softer, something like hope. And somewhere in the fading light, Jesus watched them, not with judgment, but with love. He had given them everything, every word, every truth, every invitation. Now came the building, not all at once, just one stone at a time. One choice, one act of love, one moment of trust. That's how the kingdom comes. Not in thunder, but in whispers, in the quiet yes of ordinary people, choosing to build their lives on something that lasts. He is with you, in every stone you lay. Tonight, imagine yourself in that house, the one built on the rock. The rain may come tomorrow, the winds may blow, but tonight you are safe. The walls are strong, the roof is sound, and beneath you, deep beneath you, is the rock, unmovable, unshakable, eternal. You don't have to worry about tomorrow's storms. You only have to rest tonight and trust that the foundation beneath you will hold, because it's not your strength holding you up, it's His. So let your breathing slow, let your shoulders drop, let every muscle relax, one by one. You are resting on the rock tonight, and nothing can shake it. It's sleep deeply, you are held, you are home, you are safe. Closing when Jesus finished speaking, no one moved. The sun had set, the sky was painted in shades of pink and gold, the air was cool, and the crowd sat in silence, amazed. Not just impressed, amazed because they had never heard anyone speak like this. The scribes quoted other rabbis. They argued over interpretations. They buried truth under layers of rules. But Jesus spoke with authority, not the authority of position, but the authority of truth, the authority of someone who knew God intimately. And the people felt it deep in their bones. They knew this man is different. You've heard his words. Tonight, let them rest in your here. Tea, slowly. The crowd began to disperse. They walked down the hillside in silence. Not because they had nothing to say, but because words felt too small. A fisherman held his son's hand a little tighter. A widow looked up at the stars and smiled through her tears. A young man made a decision he'd been avoiding for years. A merchant went home and burned his crooked account books. A woman forgave the person she swore she never would. And somewhere in the fading light, Jesus watched them go, his heart full, not because they were perfect, but because they were willing to try to build, to trust. That was enough. That would always be enough. You are like them, willing, and that's all God asks. The sermon is over, but the question remains, which builder will you be? Will you hear these words and let them drift away, or will you build your life on them? Not perfectly, not all at once, but step by step, choice by choice, day by day. The foundation is here. The rock is waiting, and all you have to do is build. You don't have to do it alone. He builds with you. Now the Beatitudes will be spoken one final time as a blessing over you. Listen, let them settle deep. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And now the Lord's Prayer, one final time. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come. Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we also have forgiven our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. For yours is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. Amen. May the words of Jesus bring peace to your heart tonight. May you know deeply and truly that you are seen, known, loved. May you rest on the rock. May you sleep under the shelter of his wings. May you wake tomorrow with his mercy new upon you. And may these words stay with you wherever you go, not as a burden, but as a gift. The gift of knowing how to live, how to love, how to be human in the way God always intended. You have heard the greatest sermon ever preached, and now you can rest. The words are planted. God will make them grow. One stone at a time. You will build, and the foundation beneath you will hold, because it is not made of your strength. It is made of his love, and his love never fails. Sleep deeply tonight. You are held in the hands of the one who made you. You are loved beyond measure. You are safe. Good night, and may God bless you and keep you, and make his face shine upon you now and always. Amen.